everyone. Hey, good afternoon. Let's please take your seats, and thank you all so much for being here. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Great. Thank you. I'm Ben Geman. I'm one of the energy reporters with Axios, and thank you for joining us for our event on spearheading sustainable business. I am one half of the Axios Generate Energy and Climate newsletter, so please subscribe. If you haven't already, you can find it at axios.com/newsletters. And if you're following along with us today on social media, please make sure to use the hashtag Axios House. And so, we've had a great lineup already today, and it's just going to keep rolling today and tomorrow as well. Tomorrow morning, we will have a live viewing of President Biden's United Nations address, followed by a live analysis with some great special guests from the White House and from the United Nations. And then tomorrow afternoon, we'll be hosting a one-on-one conversation with the activist Malala Yousafzai. And so, getting back to today, and without further ado, our first guest is the head of a company that is completely changing the way the climate industry and businesses approach carbon removal. So I'd like to please welcome the CEO of Climeworks, Christoph Gebald. Yeah, thank you for being here. So, one topic on a lot of people's minds, I think, right now is the upcoming US election. And I'd just love to get your sense of what could the outcome of this mean for Climeworks in particular and direct air capture more broadly, especially given some of your ongoing work with the Department of Energy.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank you, Ben, and Axios for having me. And, well, I'd answer the question probably in a similar way as your private banker did when you asked him or her about what to do with your stocks ahead of the election, and they would tell you focus on your long-term targets. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm telling you is we are focused, or we are here in this country for the long run, right? And the second thing I wanted to say is direct air capture or carbon removal more broadly has bipartisan support. And where we do expect some volatility in the next 2 months, clearly, or maybe 3 months until everything is settled, we do not expect too big of changes or volatility to what's currently out there to support us, like infrastructure support from the Department of Energy or 45Q tax credits.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that actually dovetails with something I wanted to ask you about more broadly, which is, I think we're going to hear a lot of discussion at Climate Week in the coming days about carbon removal. But I think for a lot of people, it's an industry that's still fairly new on their radar. And so I'd love to get your sense of how has the perception of this industry changed even in the last year since Climate Week of 2023?
Yeah, well, let me start as early as we started. I started the company 2009, and at that time, there was no such thing as climate science saying that you actually need carbon removal. So someone once said at that time, it felt like the early days of the Royal Society when you were discussing, is it a plate or something else, right? The perception over the last 2 years has grown very substantially. And maybe to give you a very, very concrete example on the market, like we and others in this field, we're selling carbon removal credits, and that is maybe one of the best ways to measure the perception of that industry. Mm-hmm. And year to date, 5.7 million tons of carbon removal credits have been sold. If you put that in dollars, that's $2.3 billion. And what that means is that's bigger than the voluntary carbon market, so traditional offsets, right? So that is a massive trajectory this industry went through in the last 2 years. Like 2 years ago, that number was 10 times smaller.
That's amazing. Just in 2 years, it's grown that much. Wow. Yeah, I mean, as the industry grows, one thing that I've found very interesting is that within the carbon removal sector, we're starting to see some mergers and acquisitions. I mean, the biggest one was when Occidental, the huge oil company, bought the direct air capture firm Carbon Engineering. Do you see any more consolidation coming in this industry, whether it's this year, next year, over 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, well, I think it's a natural thing that you see. There was a handful of companies that goes back to 2009 when we also started our company, Climeworks. And out of those early phase of companies, one was bought by Oxy, the other was bought by someone else. And well, we are still standing independently, if you want. In the last 3 years, we have probably seen birth of maybe 400 to 800 additional carbon removal startups, mainly going back to support by the Department of Energy, research support and supply side support, bringing a fertile ground for all of those companies. What I do expect, and what we shouldn't neglect, is carbon removal is not something that's scaling in the cloud. That's hardware, mostly hardware that has to be built. So there's a lot that needs to be done in the fields and to be learned. And we have gone through that exercise. We put the first plant out in 2017, that's 7 years back. The earliest competitors are right now starting to put out plants. And I think there will be a lot of learnings from that. And to answer your question, what will I see? What do I expect in the next 5 to 10 years to happen? Currently, we probably have a technology platform of 5 to 10 different approaches on how to capture CO2 from the air. And I do expect that maybe on the time horizon of 2030, this will gravitate towards 2 technology platforms. And several names or brands, so to say, will use those platforms. Similar to an iOS platform, an Android platform, it's very typical that in technology, things gravitate towards maybe 2 platforms.
And what would you see as those 2 platforms in the direct air capture industry being?
Well, obviously, there's a strong bias in saying that the technology we're proceeding is one of the winning ones. So we, to maybe very briefly explain the details, we have a solid filter material. It's like a foam, a very porous type of structure that has an affinity towards CO2. So we put it in touch, and the CO2 sticks on the surface once it's exposed to air, and then we heat it, and it releases again the CO2. That's one way of capturing CO2 from the air. The other one is with liquids, right? And then there are many others. I do expect that a solid process, as Climeworks is having one, and a liquid process, as a company called 1.5, owned by Occidental Petroleum, is having one, can be winning technologies by 2030.
Thank you. And sticking on this idea of industry evolution for a moment, is Climeworks on the hunt for other companies who perhaps have a slice of the attractive technology or part of the supply chain or some piece of the sector that you might be interested in? Are you on the hunt for acquisitions? And I have to ask, would you ever entertain offers from, say, a gigantic oil company or other gigantic energy company?
Well, yes, and yes. Or reject. Wait, sorry. Let me.
Let's take them in sequence.
Yeah. Let me rephrase. So first of all, we have acquired already a company. Like I think that was maybe 2018, 2019 timeframe. So we do monitor the market actually quite intensively and watch out for new technologies that can help our technology to be more efficient. Mm-hmm. I always say we have the only running plant out there globally. Like we have a running direct air capture, actually 2 of them in Iceland. And it's sort of like the first running car, right? And we're totally open, and this is happening, we're seeing that there are other companies having components that make the car better, right? Less fuel consuming, better engines, you name it. So we try to integrate those parts in our platform. The second thing that we started to do is we started by direct air capture credits, meaning building machines that pull carbon dioxide from the air and put it in the ground, right? Now, what we did over the last year, we extended our offering towards other high-quality, non-direct air capture credits. Like at the moment, if companies buy credits, carbon removal credits from Climeworks, it can only be direct air capture, but it could also be a portfolio of, say, afforestation credits, biochar credits, bioenergy carbon capture and storage credits to address that. So also in this domain, we are of course keeping our eyes open and see either what credits can we buy or maybe there are companies out there. Now on the second part of the question, how do we see the future of financing? And I'd say I'd be open for everything that helps our purpose, right, to move this forward. And clearly, what I do think is that large energy majors have to sit on the table when it comes to scaling that, because they have a lot of knowledge and workforce in a domain that's very relevant for what we are trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
Think about pipelines, underground storage. So they have to be on the table to scale this. Now, whether an acquisition of the company is the right vehicle for that, TBD, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they can be parties in projects, or maybe they can have a license in order to scale that. But I think there's not a single solution that is right or wrong. I think it's a continuum of approaches that we have to look at. But what I think is wrong is to say we go entirely without them.
Yeah.
Because at times, I think this is, people don't like to hear that. There's something called the moral hazard. Sometimes people say there's the risk that what we do extends the life of oil and gas. And I do think that doesn't make any sense. We need to have them on the table in order to scale that as quickly as we need.
Thank you. Another thing that's a couple other questions I had. One is, what do you see as we often hear that for removal to become this powerful weapon against climate change, you need to get to the billion-ton scale. What year do you see that occurring? How many years away are we from billion-ton scale?
25.
25 years.
25, okay. Yeah. 2050 is a very likely. And I can spell it out for you. 2030 will be the time when carbon removal will be operating on a 1 million ton per year scale, right? And I'm very, very convinced that with the right policy, the right supply chains, gravitation to the 2 technology platforms that I mentioned, so that supply chain can indeed focus on 2 platforms and not on 7 or 8 platforms. Yeah. I'm very convinced that in a 20-year horizon, you can scale 1,000 times, like from a megaton platform to a gigaton platform. And if we look back, I always get confidence when we have seen that already in the past, and we have seen that in solar. Solar in the year 2000 was a gigawatt globally of installed capacity. In 2020, it was 1,000 gigawatts. In the year 2000, the investments that went into solar were cumulative, something like 10 billion, right? Yep. I do expect that by 2030, cumulative investments in our domain is maybe 10 billion. Wow. So there are quite some similarities, and that gives me the confidence that we can repeat that. But solar was successful with super powerful policies, yep. And that is the assumption.
And of course, solar is something that was long underestimated. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the same, and perhaps a lot of people here have seen the same famous chart that I have. If you look at a lot of analyst estimates of the growth of solar going when they were estimating in 2000, 2010, everybody vastly undershot the ultimate, the amount of growth that we've seen. I mean, one thing that we often hear that is something of a benchmark for your industry is getting down to a cost of $100 per ton of removal. Do you see that as a feasible goal? And if it is, if we could ask you to, keep looking into that crystal ball as to when that might occur.
I do think that $200 is a realistic target. I do think that $100 is a stretch target. Okay. Like, I'm not excluding it. When I started the company, a lot of people told me, what you will do is impossible. Don't do it. Yeah. But I wanted to do it. So there's a certain degree of openness in me. Mm-hmm. So I want to be like close to this openness already today and don't say no to $100, but simply from knowing what I know today, I do think that we should aim at $200. Mm-hmm. And we might hurt ourselves if we put out too low numbers, because then policies will be made for $100, but they might not help you to what I just mentioned before, right? Yeah. To scale properly. Nevertheless, I think at $200, this makes sense. Like, if we act today, right? Mm-hmm. If we are serious about reductions, then the pie for removals is 10%. It's globally 5 gigatons, 5 to 10 gigatons. Mm-hmm. And it's totally feasible to apply a $200 on that, right? If we're not serious about reductions and the removal pie will be correspondingly higher, then of course $200 can become a very high figure. But in my point of view, a good advice to all of us is to think rather 200 than 100. Yep. And the time frame, you ask, when will that kick in? I do think more importantly than the time frame is actually the volume installed. And this is maybe something like 500 million to 1 gigaton platform that you need to be in place, which is presumably 2045
to get that
to
economy
2050
of scale
times lame. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. We're starting to run a little low on time. One thing, I think there's a lot of interest here at Climate Week and alongside the UN General Assembly in what's going to happen at COP29 in a few weeks. Now, increasingly at these COP summits, we've seen particular buckets of technologies start to get some type of recognition, target, shout-outs in different ways, whether it's in a formal summit text or a side agreement. That's all a long-winded way of asking, what are your hopes for COP29, and would you like to see some type of particular role for carbon removal in the outcome of COP29?
Well, the title of the next COP is financing, and a missing piece that we currently have, we have very good early day financing for what we do, and there's infrastructure financing at some point, toll roads, 12% IRR risk profile of a toll road. I'm afraid that we neither nor currently. We're neither a early day equity investment or a VC investment, nor are we a fully de-risked infrastructure investment. So we're in this middle where things are sort of profitable, but they're not in the teens of what is required. So if governments said, for example, we're giving an IRR guarantee to such projects, that would help to unlock capital from infrastructure investors to deploy and scale. That would be something super powerful.
Is that something that can be enabled or furthered by a COP summit?
Well, maybe rather Climate Week and rather on a more local level like the US. I wouldn't expect that on a global level like a UN party conference. But yeah, maybe a G7 or a COP committing to that, of course, would be way bigger.
Thank you. And we're starting to run down on time a little bit, so I wanted to ask one final thing, which is, I believe you live in Zurich, right?
Indeed, I live in Zurich, Switzerland, yeah.
If anyone here is lucky enough to visit briefly, what are 2 or 3 things you recommend they would do if they just had a weekend in Zurich?
That's a good question. If you're visiting in summer, a swim in the lake and the river, and you could drink it's as clean as you could drink it in the middle of the city, and then get some healthy food. And if you visit in winter, do the latter the same, get some healthy food, but replace the swim by first a sauna visit on the lake and then jump in the lake.
That sounds incredible. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Christoph, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.